Hey guys, my name is Dan Bishay,
And I'm Alessandro Faretta.
and today we'll be presenting Chapter 2 of Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True, and the chapter is titled Written in the Rocks. So we're going to start off talking about fossil formation and kind of what the fossil record is all about. For the longest time, the fossil record has been long considered a source of evolution, a source of evidence for evolution, and it kind of outlines how evolution, development of species comes to be. But what we really want to know is kind of how fossils came to be and really what are fossils. And you'll see down there are a little cool picture of fossils in the different eras throughout time.
So, we're going to first start off talking about how fossils become formed and steps to becoming a fossil. So, first and foremost, you want to actually die because fossils aren't living things, obviously. So, that's your main goal right there. And then your next goal, and this is pretty important, you want to get covered by sediment and water pretty quickly. And what this does is it helps create a protective barrier from other scavengers and stuff that would degrade your body and pretty much your bones as well. And you wouldn't be able to recognize what the being actually was before it was buried. So that's the second step. The third one is you want to survive the changes in the environment. So this is also important by getting covered by the sediment and water because it helps you, again, protect yourself from the environment and you'll be able to survive those changes. And the fourth and last step is you want to be discovered. And so this goes to people stumbling upon you just by luck. It also, once you're fossilized, you have to have the environment change in your favor so you become exposed and people can actually stumble upon you.
So we talked about what fossils are and how they make up something called the fossil record. But how complete really is the fossil record? So we only have about 0.01% to at most 1% of all the species that ever lived. So if you think about it, we really don't have a good fossil record of every species out there. But nonetheless, what we do have is still a really good idea about how evolution took place, even if we don't have the other 99%.
So what do the fossils tell us? And the first thing is that organisms first came to be about 3.5 billion years ago. It's a long time, obviously. And the fossils show us how long life has generally existed. We don't know for sure, but it gives us a pretty good idea how far back we can trace things and get a good idea about evolutionary relationships. Also, another thing it tells us is where things lived and how those things might have gotten there. So it kind of shows us migration patterns and evolutionary patterns also between species and the areas they chose to live and flourish.
So we were talking about not really knowing how old these fossils really are. How do we know at all? So what we do is we have the concept of half-life. So using radioisotopes, we can measure the half-life of something. And basically, we can also measure the age of rocks, again, these fossils, using isotope decay. Now, it's important to note that this half-life age that we come up with is the at minimum how old this thing can be. We can't say for sure its maximum age because we just don't know. So anytime we give something an age, that's the minimum age it can be.
So what does evolution tell us? Where we are today isn't where we were millions of years ago. See, we migrated and we evolved, and we didn't stay in one place. That's the whole point of evolution. We had to change with the times to make sure we survived. Simple things eventually became complex for us, and we evolved into complex beings. We started out simple, but it wasn't always the case where we're as complex as we are today. Genes have changed and evolved over time. And there are also many genes in this massive world. So we don't know exactly what our ancestors' genes were down to the T, but we could get a pretty good idea.
So this comes back to the idea of the gene pool, which is kind of deviating a little bit from the topic of written in the rocks, but it is very important to kind of note to tie things together. So a gene pool is essentially a set of all genes or genetic information in a population. It really gives us the opportunity to understand just how diverse populations really are. In turn, tying this back into fossilization and how fossils came to be, we can kind of get an idea of how very similar things may have, been part of this gene pool, which is what we would see as evidence in fossils.
All right, so going back to the fossils. There's a type of fossil we're going to talk about here, and it's a transitional form of the fossil. And this is the fossils that span two very different kinds of living organisms. But what about the missing links? How do we understand the jump between fossil records? In other words, how are we going to tell where one species came to be from the other one through evolution? And most importantly, transition between fish and amphibians. This is a key role in understanding our evolution as humans.
Enter the Tiktaalik. So the Tiktaalik rosé kind of tells us a lot about how vertebrates came to live on land. And this is a very, very, very important fossil that we identified. This was crucial in being able to understand how we come from living, being these amphibians to all of a sudden, to where we are today. And this really identified the wrists and neck and development between the two different species. So this is an example of how a fossil can provide a missing link and show how we've evolved from a common ancestor.
So transitional fossils, going back to this. Transitional fossils shine a light on how two completely different things could have evolved from one another. And this is going back to Tiktaalik, as mentioned in the previous slide. Tiktaalik actually gives us evidence, as Dan stated, where humans got the wrist and the neck characteristics from this common ancestor. And this is pretty important because it shows us true evidence that we actually evolved from a different being. Other fossils, like Archaeopteryx, show how there was a mixture of bird-like and early reptilian traits, indicating birds evolved from dinosaurs.
Other examples of transitions can include snakes that have evolved from lizard-like reptiles and lost their legs. Now, it's really important to know that the transitional fossils are really great in helping establish evolutionary patterns, but since the fossil record is still considered incomplete, there's usually no way to know exactly how close a transitional fossil is to the point of time where it split off from its ancestor. Therefore, we really can't assume that the transitional fossils are direct ancestors, although they are frequently used as such.
Fossil record summary. So we're going to go ahead and summarize everything. Evolution is true. This shows us clear evidence. Fossils clearly show that. Now, recordings in rock confirm gradual change, lineage splitting, and how forms can transition between different organisms. Things are where they are supposed to be. Transitional forms take place in the fossil record exactly where they are meant to be.
Last but not least, evolutionary change always involves taking the old and changing it into the new. Nothing is from scratch or de novo, but rather taking what once was and making it into something that can live and survive today. It's all about evolution from the simplest of beings to the most complex of beings. And with that, we present Written in the Rocks, Chapter 2 of Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True. Thank you so much for this, taking the time to watch this presentation, and we hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you guys. Enjoy.